Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a huge honor for me tonight to introduce to you Micah Barnes, who is one of the members, or at least was one of the members of my favorite singing band called the Nylons that I had the pleasure of seeing in New York and Toronto, in Vancouver, most often at the Forum, and then at whatever the Forum became at Ontario Place, and then most lately in a shorter, smaller establishment on the waterfront in Toronto. That was a wonderful place to see them perform. Micah Barnes has, in addition to his time with the Nylons, had really quite a very successful career both before and after as a solo artist and a jazz artist. My best friend, and some of you that followed me for a while know Steve Cox, who passed away just 4 years ago. Called me up one day, so excited after we had seen the Nylons on numerous occasions at the Forum, saying, "You can't believe it, Micah Barnes is joining the Nylons." And he was so excited about you, Micah, joining the Nylons, and that one of his favorite acts was going to join one of my favorite acts, and together it was going to be spectacular. You've got two concerts coming up, and so we're here to talk about those two concerts. One's on Valentine's Day, I believe, one's in Brampton, and one's in Toronto, and so it's a pleasure to introduce all of you to one of my favorite singers and members of one of my favorite bands, Micah Barnes of the Nylons. Micah, welcome to the show, sir.
Oh, Brian, thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here with you and to get to yabber about myself once again.
Fantastic. So tell me, what was it like? Like, you know, the Nylons were huge to me. They may not have been huge to everyone, but the Nylons were huge to me. What was it like when they called you up and asked you to join them?
It was a shock, to be honest. I had lost my heart in my own career a couple of years before that, and I'd actually walked away from the business thinking, all my friends have record deals. I don't know how I'm going to survive in this business. You know, I was frankly struggling, and when they gave me that phone call, it solved all the problems. Not only was I in a already established world-class act, which was a singing group, my favorite thing. I grew up on singing groups. It's one of my favorite areas of music to explore. But also, I was suddenly on a concert stage where I knew I belonged, with a record deal and a manager and a whole lot of new, challenges to conquer. How do you sing all those songs all night long? Getting my range together, figuring out how to take care of my fitness to be on the road, and how to handle myself in meetings and on publicity and television. I mean, it was huge, but I was ready for it. I was hungry for it. And I have to say, I had a lot of support from the guys in the group. They were so beautiful to me. And what you're talking about with your buddy who was excited that Micah Barnes was joining the Nylons, that was happening 100,000 times. I had so many people rooting for me that were my original fans from my own days in the business on my own. And they just kind of helped carry me. And I'm telling you, there were some shows where I didn't know the words yet, and I would look at the front row and there they were mouthing the words for me. I'm telling you, I had so much support. How could a guy not, enjoy that ride?
Now, tell me, you were, I understand, a jazz artist before, and then the Nylons are a cappella, so you no longer have instruments. Is that challenging? Is that fun? Like, what's the difference there?
Really huge difference. First of all, one's ear has to adjust. Like, I was used to getting my pitch and my intonation from the bass or the keyboard, and then suddenly it's my fellow singer. And I mean, human voices, they're flexible with pitch, right? Sometimes we move around. But you have to move as a group. So I think the most challenging thing for me vocally, if I'm honest, is that in a 4-person a cappella group, whoever's singing lead, when they step forward, the other 3 people have to shift range to take care of the chord. So if bassman Arnold is singing a lead, who's going to sing the bass in the chord? Sometimes it was me, and I'm telling you, that was a challenge. And also the high notes. When Claude would sing lead, I would have to take that high note. And that was hard. I mean, I worked with coaches to expand my range, work on my breathing and my support, something I use today as a coach, because of course I coach a new generation of artists coming up. And a lot of what I've learned in my time, in that touring the world as an artist, I'm able to sort of pass along to the next generation, which I love.
So let's talk about right now. So you are performing a couple times coming up in the next month. Tell us what you're doing, where it is, and how one might get tickets if they're interested.
Oh, I'd be happy to. So first off, we're kicking off the Valentine's concert with nylon songs that people will know from the repertoire. So that's partly why we're chatting about the nylons. I'm actually cherry picking my favorite tunes, adding the most romantic songs from the 50s and 60s that I fell in love with. And my incredible band and I have been working on arrangements for the new album. So we're going to present some of those at Hughes Room on the 14th. So it's actually Valentine's. And I promise a show full of heart and soul, and of course, beautiful jazz arrangements of well-known songs. And then we're going to take the same repertoire up to Brampton. Brampton on Stage is a wonderful, wonderful series that we're thrilled to be part of. And we've been going into the Brampton market a whole lot as a solo artist. This show is completely different in that it's presenting songs from what I call the second great American songbook. 50s and 60s, rock and roll, R&B from the Brill Building, Motown, Stax, all those incredible tunes from the golden oldies, but they're the ones that I feel really attached to. So it's kind of like Micah Barnes finally gets to sing pop music.
Micah Barnes singing pop music. Are you going to do Up on the Roof on the 14th?
You know it. The audiences won't let me not sing it. How beautiful is that? And to be honest, it was my favorite nylon song before I joined, and it still is.
Well, I used to sing it to my daughter every night when I was putting her to bed. So it's one of my favorite, along with Line Sleep Tonight.
We're going to be doing that one too. That's amazing to hear, Brian.
So it's not really jazz then. It's pop. It's American Songbook.
I'll put it to you like this. I'm a jazz and R&B singer. So I'm taking everything and passing it through my musical sensibility. So it's pop songs reimagined in jazz arrangements. So I will warn people, it's not going to be just like the record that you heard at home, because the new album that we're fashioning is really special arrangements, very jazz oriented. But they keep the flavor of the song, the heart and the soul of why those songs have stayed with us all these decades.
So Hughes Room on February the 14th, and Brampton, when is that?
Brampton is on March 30th.
Fantastic. Sounds interesting. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Micah Barnes. We're going to talk a little bit more about how we got into the business, how we got launched, and what it was like traveling around the world with the Nylons. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with Micah Barnes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga Night 60. My guest tonight is Micah Barnes, who, I knew as a singer, part of one of my favorite bands of all time, not bands, groups, singing groups, the Nylons, and used to go see them. I had an incredible experience. I was driving through Vancouver one day with my family when I lived in Vancouver, and we saw that the Nylons were playing at, I think it was called the Victoria concert hall or something like that, and we zoomed in, got tickets at the last moment, and they were front row tickets, and we walked in, and I don't know, I can't remember who it was, but someone said stop, and we were walking in the front row during the first or second song and said, "Are they all yours?" And the whole place gave me a cheer as I walked in with my whole family. You always were able to connect with your audiences in a very special way, and maybe, I don't know, I think you and a lot of some of your other band group members had a special connection to Toronto. So maybe it was different in Canada or Toronto that you connected, but it felt like you connected with your audience in a very special way. Is that true?
I'm glad to hear you say that, Brian. That was the secret of the Nylons. Musical arrangements were a really important piece of what we focused on in the group, making sure that any piece of music that we would perform, we would have worked on the arrangement really deep and real hard, because, to create an arrangement with just voices, you have to really listen for what it is that's going to bring the music to life on those human voices. But the next most important thing to us was the kind of show where it was very live and in the moment, anything could happen. Because we didn't have to rely on instruments, we relied only on ourselves. In some ways, we were free to kibitz with the audience, to have things happen in the moment. And some of my favorite Nylons memories are, I'll give you an example. In Chicago, we were at Chicago Symphony Hall, a beautiful, gorgeous, old classical hall with incredible acoustics. The sound system died maybe 2 songs in, and it's like, what do you do? So the guys had been through this before. This is early in my time with the Nylons, and they said, we're going to do the show, but we're going to do it at the lip of the stage. So we walked right to the edge of the stage. We dropped the choreography and we sang into that gorgeous house with our pure voices, no sound system. And the audience leaned in, and it was pure magic for us. And apparently for the audience too. The thing is, like, that's what would happen. The Nylons had a bit of magic in the act, and I think it has to do with the fact that we cared about the audience's experience. We cared that they would want to sing along, that would want to engage with us. So we were hungry to make a real relationship with that audience, and I think that's one of the secrets to why the Nylons stayed such a popular live act through the years.
Not all of my listeners tonight are probably familiar with what a cappella is. Could you explain that?
Sure. Get rid of the instruments. All you got is voices. It's a tradition that started, there's different, almost every culture around the world, you have pure singing with no instruments. You know, you can think of all kinds of ways that people have made choirs and small groups of singing in almost every culture. The a cappella tradition that the Nylons was part of came up partly through the doo-wop era, where a cappella groups got really popular. It was the early rock and roll, kids on the corner, no money for instruments, let's make a song. Sometimes when they recorded, they would add instruments, but sometimes an a cappella group would get really, really popular with no instruments at all. This is in the late 40s, early 50s, and into the 50s and 60s boom for doo-wop. But a lot of that was based on church singing through the African American tradition, where you have a bunch of guys praising God, using these beautiful songs, and those pure voices in harmony raised to the heavens to kind of wake up that congregation's spirit and hearts. And so you can imagine it's a very lively tradition, one that you can kind of, and the Nylons, I think, did a particularly, if I may say so, a particularly good job of updating the a cappella tradition to work for radio and concert through the 80s and 90s. And I think that was really, and into the aughts. I think that was the charm of the group, is that the smarts were, let's make records that honor the tradition and create something that feels contemporary at the same time.
Well, and I think the Lion Sleeps Tonight, where, you know, for, I don't know, several minutes at the beginning, all you're doing is making sounds around the campfire or in the jungle, is a really special interpretation of that.
Thank you. The guys all came from musical theater backgrounds, and they understood creating a story, creating drama, creating a relationship with the audience, bringing them into an environment, bringing them into the feelings. And I think that's what I learned the most, is like to honor the audience's experience. And I think that's a good example of where the Nylons managed to, you know, capture people's imaginations with just their voices.
One of the things that amazed me the most about the Nylons is that all of you were such good singers, and I may be wrong, but all of you took different opportunities to lead. And I think it was Arnold that did Chain Gang, and Claude had did he not, a high voice, and he would come in and sing different songs, and I think you probably led the most. But how did that work?
Well, you know, we really auditioned who was going to be the best lead singer for each song. And we would work with our musical director, Peter Mann, to really bring our voices out. Sometimes it would be the flavor, the emotional flavor that a singer can bring to the tune. But most often it would have to do with, if this singer is singing the lead and these are the guys left over to sing the rest of the chord, how does this sound? You know? And like if Claude's singing high, what's filling in behind him really matters. Same with any of us. And so when we did a boot camp for my big audition, a lot of what we were doing was trying me on the leads that were the baritone leads. And traditionally there was a tenor lead and a baritone lead in the Nylons, and then Arnold and Claude would step forward occasionally. And I think that really helped define the sound. But I know what you mean. I loved the fact that we rotated lead vocal. I think that was great for the audience too.
And it got people to know each one of you, or if it thought they would know each one of you.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing, getting to know an act, right? I say that to my young clients today when I'm coaching. Let them know you, because getting to know the act, getting to know the artist is what an audience is really interested in.
It was interesting. I was chairman of something called the Mississauga City Summit, and we had a consultant from the UK, I can't remember her name, come in and talk about arts and culture in Mississauga, and she was advising people that were trying to get started, and her line was something like, "You need to be confident that you've got a message in your voice that needs to be heard."
Wow,
and so what she was encouraging people was to not just sing, but to have a message in what they were singing, and a message that needed to be heard. Do you agree with that?
It's a fundamental belief that I hold in all my work, including in the Nylons and through my solo career. You have to know. I had something magical happen to me at Hughes Room once, where I opened the show for the folk legend Odetta. She was famous for she taught Bob Dylan guitar. I think that's one of the famous things she's famous for. And after after opening the show for her, after a couple of nights, she had mesmerized the crowd, and she was in a wheelchair. So she was on her last couple of shows on the planet Earth. And I said, Odetta, I am so honored to have opened the show for you. Can you tell me what the secret is to your holding us enraptured? And she said, I know what I have to give them, and I go about doing my job. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. She understood the message, and it was revelatory for me. From that moment forward, I took that into every show that I do. And really knowing what your gift that you're giving the audience is, I think, key for every performer.
I had a really interesting experience with Bob Hope once. I was working for Jim Pattison, and he had this management meeting in Penticton, BC, and he had invited Bob Hope to come sing to the final session. And Saturday afternoon, he was walking through the ballroom and saw Bob Hope up on stage practicing his lines and practicing his entrances and exits. And he went up and said, "You didn't even know where Penticton, BC was. You didn't know who Jim Pattison, the Jim Pattison Group was. What are you doing it?" And he said, "Bob Hope, whether he's in Vegas in front of 20,000 people or in front of 250 people in Penticton, BC, will be the best Bob Hope could ever be."
That's, being a performer is a much higher level of achievement than we realize when we first get into the game. We opened for Gladys. She told me by going on stage and singing every song you wanted Gladys Knight to sing, she told me what a pro she was by being warm to us backstage because we were the opening act and welcoming me to the Nylons because I was new. She told me who she was as a person. And that voice, when she sings, expresses all that warmth and all that heart and all that goodness. So really, when you go and fall in love with an artist, you're falling in love with a person. And that's how lucky am I that I've been able to take all that goodwill and love from the Nylons audiences and be able to bring them with me into a solo career. That's an incredible blessing that you can't expect it, you can't count on it. And I feel a lot of gratitude for the fact that that's become a reality.
And I've seen a couple of different artists brag that they're getting lessons from you. Tell me what you're doing in that regard.
Oh, that's nice that they're bragging. Well, I believe I had good teachers coming up. I wish I had mentors who had shown me more about what a career in this industry really is made of. So I do a series of career mastery sessions where I'm coaching career strategy. I do a lot of performance skills because of situations like the Nylons that I've had in my career. I've got some ways to help unlock performers so that they can really be genuine and authentic with their audiences. And of course, I also coach vocal technique, being such an important piece of a career. And I've been very blessed. I've had, Grammy nominated, Juno winning artists. Right now, I've got a wonderful young artist called Kaya Gamble, who's currently on American Idol. We're very proud of her, and I think audiences are going to fall in love with her. I've been a music advisor on Canada's Got Talent, so as a coach, I've got some really nice opportunities that I get to pass along to the new generation.
When you say that you train people how to be authentic on stage, what do you tell them? What
A
examples?
lot of it is for us to get out of our fear and get out of our way. You know how in life most of us feel a little insecure, a little less, cocky about like feeling like we can do a job, and I think performers suffer from an awful lot of stage fright because we have this expectation that we have to be perfect every time we go out. That is something that I try to encourage the young artists that I'm working with to overcome, that perfectionism. And that's why I named my business Singers Playgrounds. I really want people to be free to play and to let their authentic selves come out, as opposed to doing a perfect job every time.
What a great career you've had, and an interesting career.
Thank you. Well, I follow my passion. I follow my heart. How lucky is that?
So you started out as jazz, is that correct?
100%. I was 12, I was 13. I did my first open mic at one of those Yorkville coffee houses. And,
The
I
Riverboat?
didn't look, no, it wasn't the Riverboat. It was Fat Albert's. And boy, they were sweet and kind to me. I was just a nervous kid. And things started to roll pretty quickly for me. By the time I was 20, I was in the jazz cabaret scene in Toronto, working, 6 nights a week. And with a reputation, and it was shocking. By 21, 22, I kind of felt like, wow, what do I do? Like, do I move to New York? Do I go to London? Like, I got this town sewn up, in my mind, right? Because I was 21. And then I realized, I really want to sing my own material. So I moved to the Queen Street scene, which was really happening in Toronto in the 80s. And it was from the Queen Street scene where I was leading my own band and singing my own songs, is where the Nylons heard about me and plucked me to come and join them. And then after that, I got to make records on my own, and of course moved to Los Angeles for a long period of time, making records and touring there. And I've always been a jazz artist, but I'm attracted to what makes a great song. I'm attracted to what makes an audience relate to a song. So I'm not one of those jazz artists that's like, listen to how brilliant I am in my interpretation of this music. I'm much more of an entertainer than your average jazz singer. And that gets me into trouble sometimes because the purists don't like that. But, my recent records, I think, have I've attributed their success to the fact that they're communicative to audiences. And I learned that in the Nylons.
What makes a great song?
For me, it's a true human experience that's been captured in those words and that melody and those harmonies in a way that will resonate in an audience's experience. It will either remind that listener of their own experience or open up their imagination to an experience they might not have had yet that they can imagine. But a good song is about how the listener responds, whether it's a story they relate to or a feeling they relate to because they had it or they want to have it. That's the key for me. It's the listener's experience of the song.
The listener's experience of the song, and having a experience they can relate to. That's interesting. So it's not something that you're just performing in the abstract. It's something you're really trying to connect with
100%.
your audience listener.
100%. It's a Nylons rule. And I will, when I'm writing or writing a song or choosing a song, I also have to really be engaged and deeply inside the emotional world of the song as well. That's the key, because if I can't get there, they can't get there. I've got to be able to go there first.
How do you write? Do you sit down at 6 o'clock in the morning, or does it come to you in the shower, or how do you write?
You know, I am a proponent of the perspiration over inspiration. I do sit at the piano and with specific hours to write early in the day. But you know, I've learned to stay open. Sometimes the song will come in my dream. Sometimes it'll come when I'm walking down the street. Luckily, these newfangled phones all have voice memos on there so I can capture it. But you know, sometimes you're in an airplane going somewhere. It's the moments when you're not focused on something that an idea might come. But here's the key, and I say this with with a humbleness to the process because you can't control it, right? That's the problem. And that's where I think writers get into, you know, writer's block and we get really fearful. If I keep working at it, I'm more likely to have inspiration. So that's why I'm a perspiration over inspiration guy. And I will stay at that piano and work at a tune. And if I can't capture it, I'll let it go and see if it comes back to me, you know?
Perspiration over inspiration are good words for all of us in every facet of life. That's a great line. Thank you. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Micah Barnes, solo artist today, formerly of the Nylons. 2 concerts coming up February the 14th at Hughes Room and end of March in Brampton. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I can't tell you what an honor it is for me to be chatting with Micah Barnes today. I spent way too many times over the course of the last couple of decades, actually, excuse me, listening to the Nylons, just a famous Canadian band. And someone that I loved going to Ontario Place and to Harbourfront and to other places to listen to. And then a friend of mine who's regrettably passed away was a big fan of Micah Barnes before he joined the Nylons and followed him. And so, Micah, it's a real pleasure for me to connect personally with you and hear more about your story. Tell me a little bit about your most recent records, if you could, and what you're working on right now.
Oh, I'd be honored, Brian. Something happened for me. I fell in love with an amazing human being who was on his way to Broadway. So now this sounds like the setup for like a heartbreaking rom-com, and it kind of was, but I made use of the emotional turmoil that was happening for me, you know, falling in love with someone who's leaving the country and has a long contract somewhere else. You know, that's going to bring some heartache and some feelings to the surface. So whenever I went to New York, they would get on stage, you know, they'd go down to the theater in Times Square from like about 5 p.m. till about 11 p.m. They were busy doing a show. And I would lock myself in a tiny cubicle, you know, those little rehearsal studios near Times Square. And like, I kept imagining I was in the Brill building, like Burt Bacharach or Carole King, writing a hit, you know, trying to write a hit for Elvis. And I would sit down and I would feel that musical history of New York City. So exciting, because I just love all the music that, you know, New York has given us, all from right from the jazz era and right through to the, you know, the Brill building pop era and into today's music. And I kind of fashioned a really personal story through these songs that I was writing about what I was going through, kind of like a little bit of like a little one-person musical about like falling in love and, you know, and all the trials and tribulations of trying to make it work in New York. So I came home to Canada. Luckily, my partner, after the partner came with me after the contract. And so the story has a good ending. But I made a recording called New York Stories out of those songs. And audiences kept telling me, these are the songs that are the deepest for us because they feel the most real. And that changed my solo career. I had left the Nylons and gone to Los Angeles and, you know, really was writing all kinds of, you know, personal music that really I was very attached to. Did really well. I had a #1 Billboard dance hit, which was fantastic for me. You know, I had a lot of really interesting experiences post Nylons, but it wasn't until New York Stories that I kind of found my groove as a solo artist. And after exploring, you know, the album, I took that record across the country to as many, places as I could. And it was beautiful. It really sort of established me in back as a solo artist in Canada. And then I went, okay, well, what do I do now? you know, uh, and I realized, because I'm an entertainer as well as a jazz artist, jazz singer, people always go, well, you're a little bit like one of those Vegas guys, aren't you? And to be honest, Brian, that had always worked against me until I joined the Nylons, where my personality became really an important part of the act, right? I finally found myself someplace where my personality was important to making the act work. So I kept thinking about, what if Micah Barnes was back in the day performing at the Sands Hotel? What kind of songs would I sing? What kind of a ride would I be taking my audience on? And I went on this really deep dive looking for tunes from the showroom era, not the regular Rat Pack playlist that we all know and love, which I'm a student of the greats, Dean Martin, and of course, Sammy Davis Jr. and Mr. Frank Sinatra. But I started looking at what are the songs that were sung by the other jazz artists who were in the showrooms? Peggy Lee, Lena Horne, Mel Torme, Nat King Cole. You can see the list. It grows and grows. And right? And I went, okay, there's a treasure trove of tunes. So I made an album of cover tunes with a couple of originals that I wrote. The title tune, Vegas Breeze, was a tune I wrote with my brother to kind of talk about the Vegas experience, the mythology of Vegas in our minds. So after sort of making these two albums happen, the pandemic hit. So I had to just release videos of the Vegas Breeze album. I wasn't able to tour that record. And that was, it's a heartbreak we all went through. I am not alone. And, there many of us are seeking to regain our momentum after that really difficult couple of years. But the Vegas Breeze album did enough on the streaming services and still became a #1 iTunes record in Canada. So I was able to translate that into a record deal with Alma Records and Universal Music Canada. And I'm now making a third album here in Canada with Alma Records, and it's focusing on the pop era that I like to call the second great American songbook. So that's the Brill Building era, where people were trying to make hits for the Drifters and Dionne Warwick and the Supremes and et al. And so that's kind of the new focus that I'm giving myself, and that's what I'll be focusing on in these upcoming shows. That kind
Looking
of
forward to it. Before I fell in love with the Nylons, I think one of my favorite bands was Sha Na Na. So they were playing a lot of the same music.
That's it. Listen, those guys kept the flame alive for years and years. And another group called the Persuasions was an a cappella group out of New York as well. And they kept that era alive for people. And, when I was a kid, I never thought about the songs so much. I just wanted to sing. Yep. But now, because the Nylons trained me to care about the song, to care about what song is going to live in the audience's heart.
You said that you were up for your first open mic at 15. How did you get to there? Did you start singing in choirs, or how did you get your start?
I come from a very musical family. Both my grandmothers were in music. One was a singer, the other was a concert pianist. My dad was a classical composer. He started as a jazz drummer, and then he worked his way into being a conductor and composer, Milton Barnes. And my mom, Lily Barnes, wrote songs for the Mr. Dress-Up show, which she was a writer on. So I have a legacy from my parents. Can you imagine growing up in a house of Shostakovich, Barbra Streisand, Ray Charles, and Tchaikovsky, So I had music in the house, and all I wanted to do was be a performer. I wanted to be a dancer or an actor or a singer. I wasn't really sure what. But when I was 12 years old, I started to play the piano terribly, but I could accompany myself. And suddenly I was learning songs. And by 13, 14, I was in those open mics because I was driven to perform the songs I was learning to an audience. Now, why? Why would a kid want to perform that young? I don't know the answer to that. I know it's who I am. I know that I find my home on stage. Sometimes I'm more comfortable when I'm on stage than I am in life.
Really? That's
And
interesting.
yeah, well, growing up
Do
gay at that time, I wasn't really, I didn't feel so secure sometimes.
you
And
get
I think
energy
that,
from the audience?
oh yeah, I think that audience is what did it. Like they just gave me love right away. And like, walking down the street, I wasn't getting that love. At school, there were bullies, I wasn't getting that love, right? I was having to be very careful. And so I think that was probably what it was, my authentic self. I think you put your finger on it. The audience recognized who I was, and they said, we like you. And that was good for me.
The Nylons had a real connection with the gay community in Toronto. Was that of design or helpful, or tell me about that?
A number of the guys in the group were gay ourselves, and because one of our members died of HIV AIDS related causes, we were very, very close to the community, doing a lot of benefits, creating as much knowledge about that disease as we possibly could at the time. It was a really challenging time to be out and gay in the music industry. We were cautious about naming our sexuality in the group because we didn't want it to hold us back. And we recognized that people's lives were really in danger with the HIV/AIDS situation. So we really stayed close to the community and tried to do as much as we could, visiting Casey House, which is one of the places where we would bring in patients and for long-term treatment from HIV/AIDS. And we would do the kind of benefits that would raise money for research to try to change some of the laws and get some of the drugs approved. It was a really challenging time in the gay community, and we wanted to show up for our brothers and sisters as much as we possibly could.
Tell me where different members of the Nylons are today. Who's still around?
Well, Gavin Hope is one of the best singers in the world and is touring the world with beautiful Jeans and Classics is the name of the concert series that he does around the world. And the wonderful Mark, who we lost Mark many years ago to HIV/AIDS. We still have our wonderful Claude with us. Arnold, we lost a couple of years ago as well to complications from an illness. And so the guy that I was in the Nylons with as well when we replaced Mark Connors is Billy Newton-Davis. And Billy just is working on a new album, and we're doing a Vegas show together that we tour Ontario during the summer months. So Billy is alive and well and probably going to get another Juno nomination on his new album.
Will you, Billy, and Claude get together again and have a Nylon?
Oh yeah, we would do it in a heartbeat. It's something. There's a brotherhood for us. If you've been in the Nylons, Mark Cassius is one of my favorite people in the world. We weren't even in the Nylons at the same time. He's out there performing and giving the world his love. And I can tell that the two of us are like brothers because we did that. We were honored to be part of such a magical experience, both for us as performers and for audiences.
What an incredible experience that you've had, and to take it from your initial jazz experience to the Nylons, and now to your solo career doing the second Great American Songbook.
That's it.
Yeah. And remind us, Hugh's Room on February the 14th.
That's right. We're going to do a Valentine's show, and you can come on your own. You won't feel bad. We're not going to shame anybody who's not a couple, but it's there is no food at the new Hughes Room. So I'm warning people that take your honey for something scrumptious, and then come bring them to the Hughes Room down on Broadview on the 14th. And then we're playing Brampton live on stage on March 30th. The information is all on my website, micahbarnes.com.
We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes with Micah Barnes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's been a really interesting hour for me chatting with Micah Barnes, formerly of the Nylons, one of my favorite singing groups of all time, now on a solo career, and he's performing at Hughes Room on Valentine's Day and then up in Brampton a month later in late March. Micah, you mentioned that you got your start on Queen Street performing, and I've seen you in big venues, but I've also seen you in sort of medium-sized venues and Harborfront and things like that. I had someone on my show that told me one of the biggest challenges today is that you've got the big artists that are playing for like 500 or $1,000 in the big arenas, but that there aren't as many of the small venues still available to perform at. And it's really tough to make any money at those. Can you tell me, is it more difficult today to get launched in your career? Could you still do the Queen Street launch that you did?
I'm going to say that it's possible. I'm going to say we were lucky back in the day. We were able to make money quicker in our career. So I remember when working the Queen Street circuit, I was able to work a couple of different venues in 1 month. And between the two venues, I'd be able to pay my rent. I'd be able to eat food. I also started coaching quite young, so I would, float my the rest of my bills would get paid that way. But it was easier to make a living earlier in the game. The challenge now is that the smaller venues, and there are tons of fantastic venues, but they're a little bit smaller. They're built on a little bit of a different, it's very hard to run a successful large venue that is catering to original music or artists that are local. It's hard to keep that afloat. And so we have the great old legendary places like on Queen Street, there's the Cameron Tavern, the Horseshoe, the Rivoli. We've got those places that have been established forever. But we've also got some wonderful new venues like Poetry. We've got a place called Mishan, which has Turkish food and incredible international music. A place called Drom Taberna, sounds odd, fantastic vibe, all along Queen Street. So the clubs are there. It's more difficult to establish your financial sustainability. So this is where the artists struggle. Also, the rents are really high. Yep. So, we end up with artists who are stuck doing day jobs and don't have enough time to really focus on what it is that they need to focus on in order to really launch their career. Also, because streaming services don't actually pay artists all that much, you can have a real successful streaming career and you could be really hot online and not be making a lot of money. So the financial core of an artist's career, it takes a lot longer to develop. And I think it hurts us. There's no question about it. I hope one day there'll be some solutions. We're very lucky in Canada. We have government support for our recording industry, and that helps us a great, great deal. It's something that our tax dollar does go to support through Factor and through other initiatives that are government-based supportive arts. I think it's important for people to remember that when we're at the voting booth and we're thinking about our future as a country. Arts does tend to be the backbone of what makes us feel Canadian. When you really think about it, it's our sports and our artists and our literature and our painters and our singers and our songwriters that actually tell us who we are as Canadians.
I think that's beautiful. Tell us who we are as Canadians. I agree. I don't know if you know a gentleman by the name of Tom Barlow, a singer, often out in Port Credit, Mississauga, but quite a good rocker. And he was on my show, and he told me that he was really worried that in the future, artists would have to have performing as a hobby and have a mainline occupation because it was so challenging to make money in the business today. Last question: what's your favorite song to sing, and what's your favorite song to sing as a nylon?
Oh, great questions. Okay. Favorite song for me to sing of all time is Body and Soul, the jazz classic. I was trying to learn it when I was 12, 13 years old. I knew nothing about what the lyrics meant, but I felt something in that melody and in those lyrics. And over the years, I've come to feel that song as if it's my own heart. So if I'm having trouble in a show, like if the sound is bad or I'm just not connecting to the audience or something, and you watch me call the tune body and soul, you know I'm trying to get right back down to my authentic center and my feelings so I can really be with that audience in an authentic way. My favorite Nylon song, it's tricky to say because I know that the audiences loved Lion Sleeps Tonight. I know that they loved Happy Together, but I'm going to tell you my favorite was Kiss 'Em Goodbye. Now, look, it's not every day that a guy like me gets to get plucked off of Queen Street, put into an international band, and asked to sing lead on the biggest hit that the act had had. A top 5 record around the world, Kiss 'Em Goodbye. So every time we get to the end of the concert, little Micah gets to like, you know I love you, and watch an entire concert venue get up and start screaming. Like, what? Who gets to do that in their career? So I can honestly tell you that was the most fun for me, for sure, hands down.
Micah Barnes, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you and interviewing you tonight. Good luck on February the 14th at Hughes Room and in March in Brampton. You are a very special person, and the Nylons have a very special part of my history in my heart. So thank you so much for joining us.
It was my honor. Great to talk to you, Brian. I hope we'll get to do it again.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you all for joining us. We're on, I remind you, every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online from anywhere around the world, including Queen Street at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and video casts are available after I put them on the radio on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody. See you on the 14th at Hughes Room.